This one might be a shorter one, and I hope I come up with a better title than what I wrote down, because the one that I wrote down is incredibly vague. Um, it has definitely been a while since I last posted a RathRant, but a lot of stuff has happened, which I won't be going into. But I was, I wouldn't oversell myself and say reading theory, more like skimming over certain pieces that I found interesting. And I found this particular quote that lined up a lot with the idea that the social evolution of the modes of production, going from slavery or the primitive communism to slavery to feudalism, or feudalism equivalents, and capitalism, then communism. And then applying that evolution to, say, Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution, we can see that it failed pretty disastrously. And so there's a pretty solid grasp on the idea that you can't have communism before you have capitalism. And the quote from Marx from, I believe, 1857 goes, quote, "No social order ever disappears before all the productive forces for which there is room in it have been developed, and new higher relations of production never appear before the material conditions of their existence have matured in the womb of the old society itself. Therefore, mankind always sets itself only on such task as it can solve, since, looking at the matter more closely, we will always find that the task itself arises only when the material conditions necessary for its solution already exist, or are at least in the process of formation." So, that's honestly, as far as Marx goes, that's one of the least dense things you can read, in my opinion. Some of his stuff is really, really dense. It really shows its age. But it essentially means, yeah, you can't have communism before the necessary productive forces have been created for communism under capitalism. And you couldn't have capitalism before you had the necessary productive forces for capitalism be developed under feudalism. And so then I asked, well, what necessarily are these productive forces? Because, I mean, you can look it up on forums and stuff like that, and I feel like they have really, really, really bad answers. Because they talk about the productive forces generated by capitalism necessary for communism as a matter of technology or efficiency, and they don't really go very deep into that. So, what about capitalism is necessary for communism to exist? And from what I understand, a large part of it is urbanization, for one. Or really, it just goes into the, not collectivization, but the concentration of resources and the making the world smaller, essentially. What capitalism does that makes communism possible is that it unites the world in such a way that was simply not possible before. It doesn't necessarily have as much to do with technology. It somewhat does, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with technology directly. It has to do with the social conditions surrounding that technology. So the ability to build gigantic, cities with insane population densities where everyone is working in very, very close proximity, that technology alone is not what makes communism possible. What makes communism possible is all the workers being in a very, very tight space where they can organize much more easily, they can unionize, they can gain class consciousness, and they can force, or they can advocate for what they want against the employing class. When it comes to urbanization, when it comes to the technological ability to build large cities, it is not the ability itself, it is the social conditions that come from that. The same thing goes with globalization, which is also a key feature of capitalism. The ability to expand infinitely into infinite markets and to have access to all resources everywhere. That is a crucial component of capitalism. Infinite growth. And, of course, infinite growth will necessitate opening all markets to everyone, which means that the world will be more interconnected than it will have ever been before. Which means that such things like coordination, not wanting to kill, other nationalities, the very idea of nationalism, or not even necessarily nationalism, but like the idea of nations being their own separate little islands starts to peel away. It starts to vanish. And of course, the nationality is one of many distractions that the capital class uses to distract people or to divert people's attention away from more pressing issues. Why worry about your own material conditions? Why worry about your own declining wages and the rise of inflation and the rising of prices and the altogether immiseration of your own life when you can worry about the immigrants coming from other nations, which are so different, so strange, so oriental, that we could never possibly cooperate with them whatsoever. And the people that come from there are so fundamentally different that you could never possibly live normally alongside them. So as globalization happens, it becomes a lot harder to use nationality as a distraction, at least at the levels that were normally employed. Of course, when it comes to the deterioration of capitalism, the responses, especially in my view, this part isn't as necessarily informed by theory that I've read. This is more my view. Capitalism itself will advance forward into fascism, into extreme right-wing ideology in order to preserve itself. Much like capitalism, let's just scratch that. That isn't really necessarily a part of it. But yeah, capitalism in crisis will advance into fascism more necessarily than it will into communism. So, in my view, and I believe in Vladimir Lenin's view, from the very, very few things that I've read, fascism is not just this fluke or one-off beat of ideology. It is the final form of capitalism. It is both an embrace of absolute capitalism in the sense that it fully embraces exploitation of the masses by an elite class, while also rejecting, in a reactionary sense, a lot of the flaws, or quote-unquote flaws of capitalism, which make communism possible. Things like internationalism, urban life, trying to push for that more conservative, cottagecore aesthetic of life, making things more traditional, putting women back in the households, because, of course, bringing women into the workplace further cements the uniformity of the proletariat class. So, keeping sexual hierarchies in place, keeping racial hierarchies in place, keeping national hierarchies in place, all these things are necessary in order to keep back the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy, as the fascists call it, or whatever. I believe it was more the Nazis, not necessarily the fascists. So yeah, fascism is the final form of capitalism, and the only way for communism to really form is as in opposition to fascism, to late-stage capitalism. So therefore, communism isn't really possible until capitalism has sufficiently degraded and deteriorated and advanced. Because if you take away capitalism and you have communism, and you try to implement communism in a feudal system, for example, how is that really going to work? You don't have these massive urban centers. Most of the population is rural. The national situation, the domestic situation, is still very nationally based. You're not going to be pushing for internationalist movements in a feudal structure. I mean, you just look at why the Soviet Union sort of failed conceptually. The Mensheviks wanted a period of staged capitalism where the productive forces in Russia could sufficiently advance for communism to take hold. Because at the end of the day, no matter what the communist parties wanted, the peasantry were not really interested in communism. Like, they were interested in some of the ideas, bread, peace, land, those sorts of things. But they weren't really interested in, collectivization. They were interested in the solutions to feudal problems that capitalism would provide. It's a very similar dynamic. It is a very similar dynamic to how liberalism will almost always default to fascism before it will default to communism. Communism is only possible when it is the only solution to the problems that people are facing. I mean, it's very much like the quote said: communism will only become viable when the conditions for its existence have been met by a previous mode of production. The feudal peasants of Russia would not choose communism until they saw that capitalism would fail them. Liberals in America, by and large and generally, and especially like in other countries, like liberals in 1930s Germany, they will not choose socialism until fascism has already been debunked. And of course, what this all means, like in specifics, is not going to be as clear. This is all, theoretical stuff. This is sociological theory. You're not exactly going to get, mathematical studies on this sort of stuff. So whether debunked means that, you read a history book or people sufficiently suffer under fascism, I'm more, believing in the latter, since I think we're all at a stage in our lives where we're pretty sure that reading a textbook is not enough to convince the masses that fascism is bad. So, whatever debunked means, communism will only be possible when fascism has been debunked. And, of course, the best way to debunk fascism, politically speaking, is to simply mobilize on the left. It is to join movements, help unions, help strikers, organize in your community to expand pro-worker, left-wing socialist influence, essentially. And of course, I did say that one of my next rant ideas would involve what you can actually do to make a difference. Because, yeah, you can't just, vote for fascists and think, oh, I'm going to vote for fascists because that's necessary for communism to take hold, and then I'm going to do nothing else. That is not what I am saying, and that is never what I advocate for. You still need to actually, do the preparation part on the part of the left. You can't just fan the flames of the right and expect class consciousness to spontaneously appear. So what can you actually do to make a difference? Well, like I said, you can just be a part of your community. Join local left-wing organizations. If you're in the United States, there's organizations like Progressive Victory and the Democratic Socialists of America that you can join. For the Democratic Socialists of America, you have to pay in order to be a part of that. That is a proper political movement that is run by money. You cannot get anything done without money, and I will not be entertaining the argument that, oh, they can't be socialists if they're using money. The second one is Progressive Victory. I believe I've been posting that in the comments of these videos. And that you don't have to pay any money to be a part of, and I'm pretty sure the restrictions on whether you're an American or not are pretty lax. I don't really know of any foreign political movements. For the United Kingdom, I feel like it's pretty obvious that you should join the Greens or Corbyn's Your Party, whatever it will inevitably be called. But yeah, just volunteer in your community, donate to political parties that you want to see succeed, and volunteer for them, and just spread class consciousness, spread pro-worker sentiment, and of course help unions wherever you can, because more often than not there's a strike going on that you don't even know about. I attended a recent Democratic Socialists of America meeting, and I learned there was a fucking nurses strike going on. I was like, I didn't see this on the news anywhere, but there's a strike going on. It's been going on for months. So I'm gonna try and donate some food for them because they haven't been working for months. So yeah, just get out there, do something, because voting is not enough. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Voting is not enough. And what's even worse than voting is just sitting around, jacking off all day, and talking with your friends about how the world should be, and then doing absolutely nothing to make that world a reality. That's not a very extensive list of advice, but it's really all you kind of need. It is surprisingly not as complicated as you would think it would be. The biggest inhibition is going to be yourself. The biggest inhibition is going to be you not wanting to get out there. And that's not even to put myself on a high horse. I feel that I don't really do enough. I just try my best. So, yeah, the main points of this video: join local movements. If you're in the United States looking if you're in the United States looking to progressive victory, Democratic Socialists of America. Um, if you're in Britain looking to the Greens, looking to your party once that becomes a thing. If you're in other countries, I am sorry, my knowledge is not that deep. It is broad when it comes to other countries, but not deep. And then for why capitalism is necessary in order for communism to succeed, it is because, not necessarily because of technological reasons, but because of the social dynamics that come as a result of those technologies. Urbanization from city building, globalization from gigantic merchant fleets and speedy communication and transportation and all that sort of stuff. So you can't really have communism succeed until fascism itself has been beaten, because feudal peasants will always choose capitalism before they choose communism, and liberals will always, I should say, like, modern liberals, late stage liberals. There's still a few liberals out there who actually believe in stuff, but they're very few. Liberals will always choose fascism before they choose communism. So yeah, this is probably one of the shorter ones. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a nice day, and I hope this answers some questions, both in relation to what you can do to make a difference, and why communism has not historically been possible up until capitalism has sufficiently developed.